There was once a kingdom here, deep in the deserts of China's far west. In ancient times, it was known as Kucha. For more than 1,000 years, it was a proud and mighty kingdom. Then, some 1,500 years ago, it suddenly and mysteriously vanished, almost as if it had crumbled into the dust of the desert, leaving behind hardly a trace, save a few weathered and wind-sculpted ruins. To this day, much about this long-lost kingdom remains shrouded in mystery. We do not even know for certain the identity of the people who established this kingdom and where they came from. Nor do we know much about their way of life and culture. Intriguing questions also hang over the role this kingdom played as a bridge between the East and West. The story, in a sense, begins in 1889, when a young British man called Hamilton Bower rides into the small town of Kucha. At first, there's nothing strange or suspicious about him. As far as anyone can tell, he's on a hunting trip. But all is not quite as it seems. He's not after big game. Instead, he's on a manhunt. But what he actually finds on this trip changes our understanding of this forgotten, long-lost kingdom forever. A strange sequence of events has brought him here. The previous year, a British explorer called Andrew Dalglish is murdered while traveling from Leh in Kashmir to Yarkand in China's far west. An Afghan by the name of Daud Mohammed is the chief suspect. Word has it that he's holed up somewhere in Kucha. Hamilton Bower, a British Army officer, is dispatched to track him down and bring him to book. But Bower soon finds that tracking down his quarry in the vast wastes of western China is no easy matter. Intelligence, local knowledge, is going to be vital. Word goes out that Bowers is very interested in the whereabouts of a certain Afghan miscreant. So when an Afghan merchant comes calling one day, saying he's got something for Bower, the young British officer's ears prick up. Imagine his disappointment when, instead of giving him hard information about Daud Mohammed and his whereabouts, Dan presses into his hands a tattered book of incomprehensible scribbles. It won't take him any closer to Daud, but it will cast light on the mystery of the lost kingdom of Kucha.
我问他你这本书要不要？他一看呀，哎呦，没见过这个书，说这像天书一样。那个位置叫蝌蚪文啊，我们以前那个叫蝌蚪文，啊，他不知道，他说那蝌蚪一样。他说你要多少钱？是吧？他们两个讲了一下价钱，就成交了。
When he gets back to India, Bower's superiors are also baffled by the manuscript. They pass it on to the Oriental Society of Bengal's Rudolf Hornla. There's something familiar about the strange tadpole-like letters. He realizes it's a version of an ancient Indian writing system known as Brahmi script. This insight allows him to decipher some of the text. Hornla concludes that Bower's manuscript is a treatise on medicine and divination dating from the 5th century AD. It's a very rare find. Though books made of birch bark were quite common at that time, few have survived the hot and humid climate of India. Prior to Bower's discovery, only fragments of such books had been found. The completeness of this manuscript makes it a landmark discovery. But the survival of the manuscript raises another question. The arid climate of the deserts of western China account for the survival of this Indian text. What was it doing there in the first place? The quest to find the answer to this question and decipher this strange book leads to a series of intriguing discoveries in Kucha. More scripts turn up. Some are written in languages used to this very day: Chinese, Uyghur, Tibetan, and Arabic. Others, hinting tantalizingly at other long-lost kingdoms and vanished civilizations, are written in dead languages like Sanskrit, Kharoshthi, Khotan, Moni, and Sogdian. Linguists and scholars are familiar with some of these languages and scripts. Others they manage to painstakingly decipher. The presence of these scraps of writing, using lots of different scripts and writing systems, is a vivid demonstration of the crucial critical role played by the Silk Road in bringing East and West together. It shows that for thousands of years, the Silk Road was not just a conduit of trade, but also of culture. Here, a diversity of peoples, Aryans, Huns, Hans, Turks, and Uyghurs, exchanged ideas and culture, as well as goods and services. Despite Hornla's heroic efforts, the precise nature of the language the Bauer manuscript is written in remains a mystery. Though the Sanskrit vocabulary used in the manuscript allows Hornla to conclude that it is a treatise on medicine and divination, the presence of unfamiliar items of vocabulary and strange grammatical structures leaves him scratching his head. Yet the distinctiveness of the language raises an intriguing possibility. Perhaps the manuscript contains traces of the original, long-extinct native language of inhabitants of China's far west. There's a possibility that the manuscript contains traces of an unknown language, a language that had apparently disappeared from the face of the earth, the language spoken by the people of the lost kingdom of Kucha.
求字这个国名的出现是出在前来说，它记载呢就是有8万人。
它北倚天山，南涉塔里木河。 中间呢又有木扎提、魏干河和库车河，东边还有一条蒂纳河。当时作为西域36国来说，它已经是一个泱泱的大国了。
Kucha was a powerful and enduring state. References to Kucha start to appear in annals dating from about 200 BC. By 880, the kingdom of Kucha was no longer mentioned in official chronicles. Xuanzang, a notable Tang Dynasty Buddhist monk, stopped in Kucha on his way to India. He recorded details of his sojourn in Kucha in a book called Great Tang Records on the Western Regions. One thing that caught his eye was the writing system used by the Kuchans. Xuanzang insisted that it was based on an Indian one. Did he see the same script that baffled Bauer, the very script that also struck Hornla as a version of an Indian script? More intriguingly, if it is indeed the same script, what can that tell us about where the Kuchans came from and why they disappeared from the face of the earth? Shortly after the discovery of the Bauer manuscript, another document came to light, a Uyghur script called Maitre Simet. Again, it contains fascinating hints as to the nature of the language spoken by the ancient Kuchans. The Uyghurs migrated into what is now Xinjiang in the 9th century. When they settled in Kucha, they adopted local ways. In particular, they began to practice the Buddhist religion. The Uyghur script, with its explicitly Buddhist theme, is an expression of this devotion to their new religion. However, scholarly examination revealed that it was based on an earlier source. According to the preface, it was a translation of a Tocharian script. It was another layer to the mystery surrounding the identity of the Kuchians. It was a reference to another mysterious vanished people, the Tocharians. Like so much else, it is difficult to say anything about the Tocharians with certainty, but it is generally agreed that this people migrated from the Black Sea to the Tarim Basin, eventually settling as far east as Gansu around 3,000 years ago. Ancient Chinese annalists frequently make reference to peoples who might be identical with the Tocharians. For example, there is some scholarly consensus that the Rota people active in Gansu during the Qin and Han dynasties in 200 BC were Tocharians. Xuanzang mentions the Tocharians in his account of his journey to India, claiming to have traveled through a country called Tocharistan. The ethnicity and identity of the Tocharians has long puzzled and divided scholars. For this reason, many prefer to talk of a Tocharian group rather than a single Tocharian people. In 1907, the German scholar Friedrich W.K. Müller identified the Tocharian language with the ancient Kuchans. The use of the Tocharian language in the vicinity of Kucha seemed to be confirmed when a manuscript was discovered in 1974. It was a Tocharian version of the Maitre Simet, lending weight to the claim made in the preface to the Uyghur version that the script was based on a Tocharian original. But what exactly was the Tocharian language? How was it related to other languages? And how was it related to the Kuchan people? Strange as it might seem, Jin, Sui, and Tang dynasties claim that a royal city with splendid palaces and 1,000 temples once stood here. The Uyghurs living in today's Kucha County are predominantly Muslim. It just goes to show how times change. Back in the days of the Kucha Kingdom, Uyghurs were mainly Buddhists. But hardly a trace of this great capital city, a city of splendor and magnificence, is to be seen in today's Kucha region. What happened to it? Archaeologists noted that the walls of some courtyards in Kucha are built around mounds. They asked the locals about them. They shrugged their shoulders and told them they had always been there. But these mounds are not natural hillocks. They're tumuli, man-made mounds. But how long have the mounds been here? More importantly, who raised them and why?
在大唐西界有记载，就是说龟兹古城四面里面有4个墩，这个墩呢是在龟兹古城东南角一个最大的一个墩。这个皮囊呢是当地的一个维吾尔族的一个名称，翻译成我们汉语呢就是大象的意思啊。这个好多人对这个名称嘛这个不理解，因为说西域这块自古以来嘛没有大象，为什么起了一个大象这么一个名字呢？ 我的意思啊，我的理解吧，就大象吧，因为这个墩呢，它体量很大，东西长是30多米，南北宽呢也25米之多，高呢现在残高呢是14米、15米高。如果站在远处看呢，就像卧在这的一个大象一样，所以它起了它的一个比喻意，像大象一样的这么一个墩，一个大墩。
Archaeological excavations of the site confirm that between the Han and Tang periods there was a city here. Though the likelihood is that this is the very city referred to in the chronicles, so far no traces of the palaces and temples have been found. It's as if the city just crumbled into dust. It wasn't until 1978 that clear evidence began to emerge. In May that year, torrential rains caused the river Kucha to burst its banks. Some of the area's important archaeological sites are flooded. When the rains ease off, local experts assess the sites for damage. And the rains have indeed damaged one site. There's a sinkhole at the foot of one of the mounds. When they clear the rubble away and look a little deeper, they discover something of tremendous archaeological significance: a tomb.
一口彩棺。 下边还有一个棺床，彩棺当然也棺盖也都腐朽了，这个墓主人呢，这个骨架呢，还是很完整的。
Though the paint had faded, it was still possible to make out a faint diamond pattern on the coffin. For the experts who examined the find, it was an indication that the coffin contained the last mortal remains of somebody extremely important.
From 鉴定呢，看他的这个年龄啊，从牙齿啊到骨盆来说的话，很可能我们估计呢，她是一个20岁左右的一个女性。
But what was the cause of this young woman's death? Thorough examination of the skeleton revealed something very interesting, something that could explain her early death. The upper part of her cranium was strangely flat. What could have given her this deformed skull? And did it have anything to do with her death? However, it soon became evident that trauma did not explain her strangely shaped skull. There was nothing to suggest that a sudden blow had flattened her skull and caused her death. On the contrary, all evidence suggested that a long, gradual process was responsible for the shape of her skull. A few small fragments of bone found inside her pelvis pointed towards a more likely explanation for her early death. Initially, these were thought to be animal bones, possibly the remains of a sacrificial offering made when she was interred. However, closer examination showed that the bones belonged to a fetus, an unborn baby. The young woman had probably died during labor. But the discovery of her probable cause of death only focused attention on her skull. If it wasn't caused by a killer blow, what was it caused by? A possible explanation is found in the Great Tang records on the western regions. They indicate the existence of a curious tradition among the nobles of Kucha. When a baby was born, it was customary for parents to bind its head with two stiff boards. As the baby's head grows, it becomes misshapen. But why would anyone want a child to have a misshapen head? One likely explanation is that a misshapen head is a mark of high social status. Together with the elaborately decorated coffin, it was yet more evident that they had discovered the tomb of a noble. They had also identified the purpose of the huge mounds. They were tumuli, mounds raised to mark the grave of a noble. However, there was a problem. Earlier archaeological studies had apparently confirmed that the mound was not a tumulus, but the remnants of a Buddhist pagoda. It was the first evidence ever found that people had ever been interred beneath a pagoda in what is now Xinjiang. Quite simply, the discovery was unprecedented. The ruins were named Subash, the Lost City. The skeleton of the woman is now kept in Kucha Museum. The monk Xuanzang, who came this way in the mid-600s, records seeing a huge temple of tremendous beauty, which he calls Jahuli, and that it was the first such temple that he had come across in western China. The king of Kucha invited Xuanzang to preach in the temple. He accepted the invitation and stayed for 60 days. Built on opposite sides of the river. Could Subash be the legendary Jahuli described by the Tang Dynasty monk? Subash is located on the terrace north of Kucha, right next to the Kucha River. Right across the river, there is another large ruin. The ruin on the eastern bank of the Kucha River is as dilapidated as the one on the western bank. Fortunately, the pagoda has survived relatively intact. Evidence that grottos were carved into the weathered walls of the temple where Kucha's royal family worship. In 1903, an expedition to Subash led by Count Otani Kuzue, a Buddhist abbot from Kyoto, Japan, makes a great discovery. They unearth a Buddhist reliquary. One of the lost kingdom's greatest secrets is about to be disclosed. In 1957, more than half a century after its discovery, somebody notices traces of paintwork on the reliquary. But it's only when the paint is peeled off that an amazing picture reveals itself. 4 naked boys, each playing a different musical instrument, are depicted on the lid. Round the side of the box is a vivid dancing scene. According to Japanese scholars, the reliquary dates back to the 7th century. The painting is a depiction of one of the Kucha people's most important festival, a holiday called Samuja. Buddhism originated in India in 600 BC and rapidly took hold all over Asia. Buddhism probably came to China via the Silk Road. This shows just how important the Silk Road was in Chinese history. It wasn't just trade that flowed down the Silk Road. Ideas and culture came too. As we saw with the Xinjiang, Kucha occupied an important position on the old Silk Road. It was a natural place for pilgrims and Buddhist preachers to stop off. The fact that this science of dancing and feasting was painted inside a Buddhist reliquary is significant because it suggests that traditional Kucha culture and Buddhist teachings had blended. A traditional scene of merriment embellishes a box for holy relics. It's a kind of memento mori, contrasting earthly pleasures with eternity, with nirvana. According to the Annals of the Tang, in November 705 CE, Emperor Zhongzong watched the Samuji being celebrated in Luoyang's southern gate. The annalist is particularly struck by one strange custom observed by these exotic foreign dancers. Even though the weather is extremely cold, they douse each other with water. The 3rd century AD, a time when the Chinese of the Central Plains were still unfamiliar with Buddhist teachings, marked the zenith of Buddhism. Gaha grottos are composed of 614 grottos scattered over 9 different locations. The murals found The Russian explorer Peter Kuzmich Kozlov reaches Subash in 1898. Although his expedition unearths a cache of relics, what really captivates him is a huge stone he finds in the East Jahuli Temple. Much to the resentment of his laborers, who are unable to see anything of value or significance in this vast lump of rock, Kozlov insists on taking the stone with him. Eventually, he manages to cajole his men into breaking the stone in two, and with the aid of a few horses, dragging the pieces back to Kucha. But though his men are understandably resentful as they sweat under the strain of dragging 2 huge lumps back into town, Kozlov knows something they don't. He's been doing some reading. Xuanzang's Great Tang Records on the Western regions mentions a cream-colored piece of jade, more than 2 feet in length, in the East Jahuli Temple. This piece of jade is supposed to bear the very footprints of the Buddha himself. It's one of the holiest treasures of the Buddhist world. Kozlov believes he's found that piece of jade. He's determined to get it back to Russia, whatever the cost. But when the rock reaches Kucha, an old jade carver hears about it. He knows nothing of its religious significance, but knows a top-quality piece of jade when he sees it. He successfully enlists the support of the local government to prevent the piece leaving the area. Kozlov has been outfoxed. Without the cooperation of the local authorities, there is no way he can get his jade out of Kucha. With time short and another expedition beckoning, Kozlov reluctantly leaves the jade behind. The following year, Kozlov returned to China in search of the fabled lost Tangut city, known in Mongolia as Karakoto and in Chinese as Blackwater City. His successful identification of the site of the ruined city won him fame in the worlds of archaeology and exploration. Lauded and showered with honors, such was his international celebrity that he never made it back to Kucha to follow through on his earlier discoveries. Word has it that the piece of jade Kozlov found was left in the courtyard of the Kucha County office until 1964, when it was wrapped up and shipped to the Beijing Museum of Natural History. However, there is no record that Beijing Museum of Natural History ever received this priceless piece. To date, searches of their extensive collections have failed to turn up anything corresponding to the jade piece removed from the Kucha site. Rumors, though, abound of the true whereabouts of the jade. A local antiques dealer claimed that he saw 2 pieces of jade lying at the bottom of a ditch. He naturally left the priceless fragments where they were. Sadly, a local merchant was not so scrupulous. With the help of a winch, he got them out of the ditch and they disappeared into the blue. However, the truth is that the stories about how people prevented Kozlov getting the jade out of the country are largely fanciful. The craze for archaeological exploration in China meant that numerous Chinese antiquities were smuggled out of the country. More often than not, there was nothing ordinary people could do about it. Stories of how local heroes guarded the treasure need to be taken with a large pinch of salt. As a precious stone, the jade was of limited value. What made it priceless was its religious and historical significance. The jade piece can be seen almost literally as the stepping stone by which Buddhism made its way from India to China. However, for Buddhists, there's one thing that matters far more than jade carvings and temples: the sutras. The challenge for a country that has just adopted the Buddhist faith is to make sure people can understand them. They need to be translated. Kumarajiva, a Kuchian Buddhist monk and scholar, became a noted translator of Buddhist scripture. Xuanzang is perhaps the most famous Chinese Buddhist monk. His 7th century translations of the Buddhist scripture from Sanskrit into Chinese are considered classic. However, the name of Kumarajiva, who translated the same Buddhist scriptures 3 centuries before Xuanzang, is less well known. The purpose of Xuanzang's journey to India was to study the Buddhist teachings in their country of origin, India. Kumarajiva, however, made an equally important journey in the opposite direction. In 68, Emperor Ming of Han Dynasty sponsored the construction of the White Horse Temple in Luoying. It can be seen as the first Buddhist temple in China's heartland. However, questions remain unanswered. Nobody knows exactly when or how Buddhism first entered China. What is almost certain is that Buddhism entered the west of China via 2 routes: to the south through the Pamirs and Khotan, to the north by means of Kashgar and Kucha. The geographical proximity of western China to the then Buddhist heartlands of Central Asia and India means that the religion almost certainly took hold in the west before it arrived on China's central plains. This has important ramifications. The translation of Buddhism to the central part of China via the far west, rather than by direct contact with India, meant that the Buddhist sutras were transmitted in translated form. By the time they were translated into Chinese, they had been translated several times already. The Chinese versions were inaccurate and corrupt translations of translations. The cultures and states of China's far west did not suffer from the same problem. Firstly, the languages and writing systems they used were directly modeled on Indian ones. Secondly, ethnic and cultural affinity with India helped to minimize corruption of the texts. Chinese Buddhism was sorely in need of a master who understood the cultures of India, China's far west, and China's central part. Kumarajiva's father, Kumarayana, was the son of a chief minister of one of India's princely states. In the 4th century AD, he crossed the Pamirs and arrived in Kucha, where he became a priest to the royal family. The king's sister, Jivaka, also a pious Buddhist, married Kumarayana. Jivaka soon fell pregnant. It was said that while she was with child, she would often come to Soji Temple in Subash to listen to the Buddhist teachings and memorize the Buddhist texts and sutras. In the fullness of time, she gave birth to a boy. She called him Kumarajiva. One day, Jivaka noticed the graves and burial grounds that littered the outskirts of the city. Suddenly, she became acutely aware of suffering and the brevity of human life. The result was a spiritual awakening. When Kumarajiva was 7, his mother, Jivaka, became a nun. He accompanied her to her priory, the Saoli Temple. Ever since his earliest childhood, Kumarajiva had displayed extraordinary insight into the Buddhist scriptures. After 2 years' study in the Saoli Temple, his mother decided that he needed more advanced instruction in the Buddhist scriptures. She took him to Kashmir. On his way back to Kucha 3 years later, he journeyed through Tokharistan to Kashgar, where an arhat predicted a bright future for the boy. He was destined to spread the word of the Buddha far and wide. Buddhism was founded in 600 BC, but it wasn't until 100 BC that Mahayana Buddhism appeared in northwest India. After that, Buddhism divided into two branches, Mahayana and Hinayana. While Hinayana branch emphasizes the liberation and enlightenment of the self, Mahayana tradition stresses the goal of complete enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. When Buddhism entered Western China, the Mahayana tradition came in from the south via Khotan, while in the north, places like Kucha adopted Hinayana. In his early years, Kumarjiva's spiritual influences were almost entirely those of the Hinayana branch. However, all that changed when he went to Kashgar. There he met monks of great learning who introduced him to the Mahayana tradition. He began to waver between the two.
秋池这个地区呢，实际上是，鸠摩罗什早年出家的时候，他信的还是应该说一切有部，也属于小乘的一个部派，就部派佛教吧，一部。可是后来他在南部，就他那个盆地的南缘的时候，他就接受了大乘的教义，改信了大乘。他认为大乘
a proactive attitude to life. Spiritual endeavor was about more than securing personal liberation and enlightenment. It was this attitude that drove Kumarjiva out into the world and won him fame in the whole of Western China.
他要说法的时候，他要上那个说法台高台嘛，都要踩着那些王族们，包括王，西域各国的王。 来听法都要趴在那里，他踩着他的背往上走。
However, young Kumarjiva was haunted by two predictions made about him.
他从现在克什米尔留学吧，回来以后，他母亲带着他，当时碰到一个大和尚，就跟他说，如果40岁就那个是不破戒啊，他大概可以成就很大的功果。
Another prediction came from his mother.
你的这个才华只能到东方，那就说是语言啊，一定要到中原去发挥他的才能。
After the fall of the Western Jin dynasty, China became divided into 16 petty states, all warring with each other. Emperor Pujian of the former Qin dynasty attempted to bring together not just the Central Plains, but also the Western kingdoms and states. In 383, he ordered General Lu Wudang to launch an expedition to Kucha. The emperor was a Buddhist himself and instructed Lu Wudang to send him Kumarjiva the moment his conquest of Kucha was complete. Lu Wudang's army soon reached Kucha. Kumarjiva tried to persuade the Kuchian king to open the city for the sake of peace. His entreaties were rejected. The king chose to fight with Lu Wudang. His army was soon defeated. When General Lu Guang captured Kumarajiva, he began to sense that the prophecy told about him was about to come true. He was on his way east. However, General Lu Guang didn't send Kumarajiva to Chang'an immediately, as Emperor Fujian commanded. In the first instance, he didn't recognize the value of Kumarajiva. Secondly, but perhaps more importantly, he had become addicted to Kucha wine. Lu Guang was a drunkard. He had no time for Buddhist ideas and their practitioners. Instead, he liked to amuse himself by forcing them to violate the principles of their faith. He took great delight in forcing Kumarajiva to drink wine, a violation of his vows. When he locked the pious monk in a room with a Kucha princess, nature took its inevitable course, and his vows of chastity were broken too. He remembered the prophecy made by the monk on the road to Kashgar. He thought it was the end of his Buddhist spiritual life. One year later, General Lu Guang finally decided to take Kumarajiva back to Chang'an. However, when they reached Liangzhou, news came that Emperor Fujian had been killed in a battle. The dynasty was finally at an end. General Lu Guang's response was to make himself king of Liangzhou. Lu Guang didn't have to take Kumarajiva to Chang'an now. But, drunkard though he was clear-headed enough to appreciate Kumarajiva's intelligence. He made the monk into his oracle, a fortune teller who would interpret the dreams of this usurper and tell fortunes. For 17 years he was the king's fortune teller. During that time he stopped practicing and preaching Buddhism. Yet some good came out of his long sojourn in the court of the king. He mastered the Chinese language. Now, potentially, there was a Buddhist scholar who could bridge the gap between East and West, a scholar who understood Sanskrit, Kucha, and Chinese. After the former Qin dynasty was overthrown, the new ruler made repeated pleas to Lu Guang to free Kumarajiva and send him east to Chang'an. After this plea was repeatedly rejected, in 394, Emperor Yao Chang, a Buddhist, waged war on Lu Guang. Emperor Yao won, and Kumarajiva was finally on his way to Chang'an. This is Taotang Temple, 50 kilometers from Xi'an, known as Chang'an to many dynasties. In 401, Kumarajiva arrived here not as a captive but as a guest. Emperor Yao Chang made him a royal priest. He not only took on 800 students, but more importantly, began to preach Buddhism the length and breadth from China. the monks and followers of the Shingonji Temple, Tokyo, come to the Caotong Temple in Xi'an to pay tribute to Kumarajiva. It is a testament to his influence. His translation of the Lotus Sutra is still in circulation among Buddhists to this very day. In 413, at the age of 70, Kumarajiva died in Chang'an. It is said that when his body was cremated, his tongue remained unburned in the fire. His followers then remembered a prophecy he made about himself. If my translation of the sutras are free from mistakes, when I am cremated, my tongue will be unscathed. Buddhism has had a huge effect on Chinese culture. Kumarajiva's contribution was like a breath of fresh air for Chinese Buddhism, helping to assimilate the religion and make it an integral aspect of Chinese culture and tradition. There was never peace for long on the Silk Road. For Kucha, occupying as it did a strategically vital position on the Silk Road spelled trouble. The kingdom was constantly under threat. So what does the king of Kucha do to save his kingdom when he finds it under attack? And what happens to Guoxin, the great Tang Dynasty general, when he leads an expedition against Kucha? Join us for the next part.